The year was 1876, and Kestrel Bluff was a monument to forgotten intentions. It was less a fort and more a collection of splinters pretending to hold back the desert. The wind, heavy with grit from the flats, never stopped its work. It screamed through the gaps in the palisade, a high, thin sound that wore on a man's nerves faster than whiskey. It had chewed the garrison flag down to a few ragged threads of red and blue, which slapped uselessly against the sun-bleached pole. Jonah Mercer sat on an ammunition crate, his back pressed against the rough adobe of the quartermaster's shed. The position was a lie. He was not a quartermaster. He was an artilleryman, or had been, before the noise in the crowds and the rigid certainty of command structures had hollowed him out. Now, he was just Jonah, the man assigned to watch over supplies that rarely came and never went, exiled to the quietest, most pointless posting the army could find for someone difficult to integrate. His journal lay open on his knee. The leather cover cracked like dried mud. The pencil felt thick and clumsy in his scarred fingers. He wrote, not for a record, but to prove the day had passed. August 3rd. Wind unchanged. Salt in the water barrel is worse. Found one scorpion in boot. Killed it. Found another in the rafters. Let it be. He paused, the lead hovering over the cheap paper. A deeper, older thought pushed its way up. He pressed down, the graphite snapping. He cursed, sharpened the stub with his belt knife, and wrote the thing that was true. I haven't slept beside anyone since the war. He snapped the book shut. The admission left a taste like gunpowder in his mouth. It was a sterile fact, cold and hard. But it was also the entirety of his story. The war had taught him how to sight a 12-pounder Napoleon, how to pack a wound with salt, how to lie perfectly still while men screamed. It had not taught him how to stand in a mess line, or how to take a shared bunk, or how to breathe the same air as another human being without feeling the urge to bolt for open ground. And now, there was her. She was in the telegraph shed, which was really just a lean-to with a dead key and a coil of rusted wire. He had put her there because it was the only structure with a solid door and no windows. Tallulah Nashoba. He did not know her name, not yet. To him, she was just the Apache woman, and she was the first person he had been forced to share this desolate space with in 6 months. He had found her the day before, a patrol he was not supposed to be on, riding into the narrow slit of Red Butte Wash, chasing a shadow he thought was a stray mule. The air in the canyon was dead and hot. He found the signs of a scuffle. Not a battle, nothing grand, just the messy, desperate marks of a few men and one smaller, lighter body. There were disturbed rocks, a few spent. 44 caliber casings, Henry rifle, not army issue, and a single moccasin print pressed deep into a patch of alkali dust. She had been 50 yards up the wash, hidden in a cleft of rock, watching him. Not hiding. He realized. Watching. She did not run, she did not fight. When he dismounted, his carbine held loose and low. She simply stood. She was alone. There were no bodies, no horses, just the faint smell of burned sage and the unsettling silence of the rocks. Protocol was clear. Any native found off reservation, especially near signs of a conflict, was to be detained and escorted under guard to Fort Meridian. Meridian was a real fort, 100 miles south, with a full company, a stockade, and a hanging judge who served as the local magistrate. He had tied her wrists. She had offered them. Her gaze level, her hands surprisingly clean. He used a standard-issue rope, tying a knot he knew from his gunnery days, a knot meant to hold against the recoil of a field piece. But his hands had faked the final pull. The rope was tight enough to be regulation. It was tight enough to satisfy any cursory inspection from a superior officer he would never see. But it was not tight enough to bite. It would not break the skin. He had seen the chafing, the raw, bloody bracelets left by men who pulled their knots with anger or fear. He had done it consciously, this small act of mercy, and it shamed him. It was a weakness. He had brought her back to Kestrel Bluff. His report, if he ever wrote it, would cite the need for supplies, lacking sufficient horses for prisoner transport, water barrels dangerously low, awaiting clarification from command. It was all lies. He had 3 good horses. The well was bitter, but it was wet. The truth was, Jonah Mercer was terrified of Fort Meridian. He was terrified of the crowds in the yard, the clatter of the mess hall, the sudden, shouted orders that made the skin on his back tighten and his hands clench, his carbine held loose and low. She simply stood. She was alone. There were no bodies, no horses, just the faint smell of burned sage and the unsettling silence of the rocks. Protocol was clear. Any native found off reservation, especially near signs of a conflict, was to be detained and escorted under guard to Fort Meridian. Meridian was a real fort, 100 miles south, with a full company, a stockade, and a hanging judge who served as the local magistrate. He had tied her wrists. She had offered them, her gaze level, her hands surprisingly clean. He used a standard-issue rope, tying a knot he knew from his gunnery days, a knot meant to hold against the recoil of a field piece. But his hands had faked the final pull. The rope was tight enough to be regulation. It was tight enough to satisfy any cursory inspection from a superior officer he would never see. But it was not tight enough to bite. It would not break the skin. He had seen the chafing, the raw, bloody bracelets left by men who pulled their knots with anger or fear. He had done it consciously, this small act of mercy, and it shamed him. It was a weakness. He had brought her back to Kestrel Bluff. His report, if he ever wrote it, would cite the need for supplies, lacking sufficient horses for prisoner transport, water barrels dangerously low, awaiting clarification from command. It was all lies. He had 3 good horses. The well was bitter, but it was wet. The truth was, Jonah Mercer was terrified of Fort Meridian. He was terrified of the crowds in the yard, the clatter of the mess hall, the sudden, shouted orders that made the skin on his back tighten and his hands clench. He feared the paperwork. He feared the questions. He feared the simple, crushing proximity of other people. Here, at Kestrel Bluff, there was only the wind. The wind, he understood. Now, there was her. He stood from the crate, the journal going into his back pocket. The sun was bleeding out across the western ridge, staining the sky a deep, bruised red. It was time to take her food. She had not spoken a word since he found her. Not one. This silence was selective. He knew. It was not the silence of ignorance. It was the silence of refusal. It was a weapon, and it was far more effective than the small knife he had taken from her boot sheath. He filled a tin cup with water and grabbed a cold biscuit. He walked the 10 steps to the telegraph shed, his boots scattering gravel. He unbarred the door. She was exactly as he had left her, sitting on the floor, her back straight against the far wall. Her hands were still bound in front of her, but her eyes were not the eyes of a prisoner. They were calm, appallingly so. They were dark, and they missed nothing. He set the cup and the biscuit on the floor, 6 feet from her. She did not look at the food. She looked at him. Jonah felt the gaze like a physical weight. She was watching his chest, studying the way he breathed. He realized, with a jolt, that his own breathing was shallow, caught high in his throat. He forced himself to exhale, and the sound was too loud in the small space. This was the tension, this unspoken, unbearable pressure. He was the captor. He had the rifle, the keys, the fort. She was the captive, bound and unarmed. Yet he was the one sweating, and she was the one who looked like she was simply waiting for a late stagecoach. He could not hold her gaze. He looked away, focusing on a crack in the adobe wall, on the dust motes dancing in the sliver of red light from the doorway. He avoided her eyes the way a man avoids the dark, reflective muzzle of a pointed gun. To look was to acknowledge. To acknowledge was to connect. And connection was the one thing he could no longer survive. He needed to leave. He needed to bar the door and return to his crate and the impersonal shriek of the wind. But his feet were nailed to the floor. The silence stretched, filled only by the rush of blood in his ears. The words came out before he could stop them. They were torn from him. A raw, ragged confession meant for the dust, for the dying light, for the ghosts of the war. But he said them to her. "I've forgotten," he whispered, his voice cracking with disuse. "I've forgotten how to be near a person." He flinched, expecting her continued silence, expecting the wind to mock him. She waited a beat. Then, in slow, measured English, the words careful but clear, she spoke for the first time, not forgotten. Tallulah Nashoba said, her eyes still locked on his. Just avoiding. The air left Jonah's lungs. He stumbled back, pulling the door shut, the heavy bar thudding into place. He leaned against the wood, his heart hammering a sick, frantic rhythm against his ribs. The evening light was gone, replaced by a deep, cold twilight, and from far across the dark, flat expanse of the desert, coming from the direction of Verde Arroyo, he heard the lonely, wailing cry of a train whistle the sound of a world that was moving on, leaving him behind in the dark with a voice that knew too much. Her words had latched onto him, and they had not let go. Dawn broke over Kestrel Bluff not with light, but with a raw, agonizing clarity. Jonah had not slept. He had sat on his ammunition crate, the cold of the desert night seeping into his bones, and he had listened to the wind. It sounded different now. It sounded like it was carrying whispers. Not forgotten, just avoiding. He pushed himself up, his joints cracking in protest. The first order of the day was always the perimeter check, a useless ritual. No one had come to this post in months, save for the occasional supply wagon he now questioned. But it was a structure, a habit, and habits were the only things keeping him from dissolving into the grit. Today, he looked closer. He did not just walk the line, he studied it. He found them just outside the weak south side gate. Hoof prints, 4 horses, maybe 5. They were not shod with army-issue iron. The edges were worn, one print showing a distinctive chip in the hoof wall. They were shod for hard rock, not sand. And they were fresh, no more than 2 days old. They had come, paused, and turned back toward the east. He followed the trail a few yards to a shallow wash, where he found the ashes. A small, smokeless fire. The person who built it knew what they were doing. He sifted the gray dust through his fingers. It was cold, but it was new. The ground beneath was still dark with the heat. Then he saw it. Snagged on a shard of creosote bush, almost invisible, was a scrap of cloth. He picked it up. It was wool, a deep navy blue. The thread count was high. This was not the rough-spun cloth of a homesteader or the buckskin of a scout. It was uniform grade. But it wasn't the light blue of the infantry. It was the dark, formal blue of a railroad man's jacket, or perhaps an officer's dress coat. He stood, the wind whipping his hair into his eyes, the hoof prints, the cold fire, the expensive cloth. It felt wrong. It felt like a scene set for a play, each piece placed just so. It was a message, but he did not understand the language. It felt staged. He returned to the fort, his mind racing. The woman, Tallulah, she was at the center of this, whether she was the actor or the audience. He did not know. He went to the well, drew a fresh bucket. He poured a cup and went to the telegraph shed. He unbarred the door. She was sitting in the exact same position, back straight, as if she had not moved all night. But her eyes were sharp, alert. They tracked him as he entered. "Water," she said. Her voice was low, rough with thirst. He hesitated. The protocol was to deny comforts. The protocol was to maintain distance. He set the cup on the floor, same as before. She looked at the cup, then at him. "The rope," she said, nodding to her hands. "It is hard to drink." He knew. He had tied it. He knew it was loose enough to writhe, but not to work free. He had not considered the simple mechanics of lifting a cup. He felt a flash of dull, stupid anger at himself. He went to his own quarters and returned with a long, carved wooden spoon. He dipped it into the cup, filling the shallow bowl, and knelt just outside her reach. She leaned forward, slow and deliberate. She did not lunge for the spoon. She watched him. He extended his arm. His hand was shaking. It was a small tremor, a relic of the artillery lines, the constant, bone-jarring thunder that had rattled his nerves loose. He tried to grip the spoon tighter, but the shaking only worsened. A drop of water spilled onto the dusty floor. He cursed under his breath. Her eyes were not on the water. They were on his face. She was not watching his hand. She was watching the muscle jumping in his jaw. She was reading the panic in the set of his shoulders, the tightness in his neck. She was cataloging his damage. She parted her lips and said, "I did." He admitted. The confession was sandpaper in his throat. "After Shiloh Flats, my signature was just a thing I did. I signed provisioning reports, transfer papers, bounty slips. I did not read them. I just wanted the men out of my tent." "He used your tired hand to steal." She said, "It was not an accusation, just a statement of fact." This changed everything. The loneliness of the fort was no longer a sanctuary. It was a blind. He was a piece in a game he did not know he was playing. He turned from her and marched to the storehouse. The thick wooden door groaned on its hinges. The air inside was cool, smelling of salt pork, canvas, and axle grease, and something else. Gun oil. He kept his own ammunition in a separate locker. The bulk of the supplies were army issue, rotting slowly. But in the back, behind a stack of moth-eaten blankets, was a crate he had ignored. It had arrived on the last supply run, the one he thought was strange because it came from the north, from the railroad line, not from the south, from Fort Meridian. He had assumed it was a clerical error. Now, he looked closer. The crate was new, the pine still yellow, and stenciled on the side was not the U.S. Quartermaster's shield, but the crossed bugles and eagle of the Meridian Pacific Railroad Company. He grabbed a pry bar and cracked the lid. It was not hardtack. It was not blankets. It was packed with boxes of .44 Henry shells, the same kind he had found in his boot, the same kind used by bounty hunters. This forgotten post, this dumping ground for a broken soldier, was being supplied by the railroad. He was guarding an arsenal for Holt Bracken. He stumbled back, the pry bar clattering to the floor. He felt sick. He slammed the door shut and leaned against it, breathing hard. He looked over at the telegraph shed. Tallulah was standing in the doorway, watching him. She must have slipped the knot while he was in the storehouse. He felt a moment of pure, cold fear, but she made no move to run. She just looked at the storehouse, then at him. Her gaze drifted to the crate he had dragged partially into the light. She saw the stenciled bugles. "A purchase," she said, her voice carrying easily on the wind. The word chilled him. "What do you mean?" "The railroad buys the land. When they cannot buy it, they buy the men to clear it. When the men are not enough, they buy the bullets. The fort is not forgotten. It is a way station, a place to store the tools for a war that is not a war." She pointed east, toward the mountains. "They stage raids. They blame my people. The treaty breaks. The railroad gets its land." Her logic was clean, sharp, and it cut straight to the bone. He looked at her, really looked at her. The captive Apache woman was gone. This was someone else. He noticed, for the first time, a fine, pale dust clinging to the beaded hem of her shawl. It was not the red dust of the flats or the brown grit of the fort. It was pale gray, with flecks of mica that glittered in the sun. "Where did you get that dust?" She looked down, surprised. "From the rocks, where I was waiting." "What rocks?" "The White Lark," she said. "The White Lark Mine. An old silver claim up in the Dragon's Tooth, abandoned for 20 years. It was a warren of tunnels, a perfect place to hide men, or guns, or a captive. He had a choice. He could let her go, and she would walk into Bracken's trap. He could turn her over to Fort Meridian, where she would be a voiceless prisoner and he would be a fool. Or he could keep her here. "I'm holding you here," he said, the words sounding false and hollow even to him. "I'm waiting for a signal from the desert relay station to confirm my orders." It was a weak lie. The relay station was 2 days' ride, and the telegraph wire was rusted through. He was not waiting for orders. He was thinking. For the first time since the war, Jonah Mercer was genuinely, terrifyingly, thinking. She nodded, accepting the lie. She knew what he was doing. She retreated back into the shadows of the shed, leaving him alone in the courtyard. The sun set. The air grew cold. He did not light a lamp. He sat on his crate, the fort locked down, the rifle across his knees. He thought he was alone, but he was not. He was hyper-aware of the other person in his space. Night fell completely. He heard a sound from the shed. Not a footstep, not a voice. Just the dry, faint rustle of cloth, the sound of her shifting her weight, the whisper of her shawl against the adobe wall. The muscles in his back seized. Every nerve ending screamed. It was the old fear, the terror of proximity, the feeling of an enclosed space with another breathing human. He wanted to run. He wanted to yell. He wanted to fire his rifle at the shadows. He just sat, rigid and shaking, his knuckles white on the stock of his gun, listening to the impossibly small sounds of a woman breathing 20 yards away. The night in the high desert was not a void, but a presence. It was filled with the sounds that had driven Jonah to the edge of madness after the war, the sharp crack of cooling rock, the hiss of sand-laden wind, the sudden, percussive snap of a dry branch. Each one was a percussion cap. Each one was a prelude to thunder. He was standing by the water barrel, the tin dipper shaking in his hand, when a gust of wind slammed the main gate shut with a sound like a distant cannon shot. Jonah dropped. He was not at Kestrel Bluff. He was at Shiloh Flats, in the mud, the air thick with sulfur and the screams of horses. It was night, and the rain was cold, and the entire world was ending in flashes of orange light. His own guns, a battery of 6 Napoleons, were firing so fast the barrels glowed a dull, sick red. "Hold the line," he was screaming, his throat raw. "Fire, it will fire." A shell came in short. Not theirs, not ours, just a stray piece of iron. It struck the limber chest 20 feet away. The explosion was not a boom. It was a wet, final thump. Shrapnel, wood, and men were thrown like feed. He found Silas after the volley, his best gunner, a boy from Ohio who carved birds out of scrap wood. Silas was on his back in the mud, his hands trying to hold his own stomach together. "It's cold, Jonah," Silas whispered, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. "We'll get you back." Jonah lied, grabbing him, trying to lift him. He pulled Silas into his arms, into his lap, trying to shield him from the rain, from the noise, from the night itself. He held him. He rocked him. "Just hold on," Jonah begged, pressing his own cheek against Silas's sweat-soaked hair. And then, a new sound, the high, thin whistle of a shell coming right for them. Jonah's training screamed at him to drop, to run, to get to the next gun. He froze, clutching Silas. The shell hit 10 yards away. The blast tore Silas from his arms, throwing Jonah back into the wheel of the cannon. He lay there, stunned, his ears ringing. He saw Silas's body, a ruined thing in the mud. He should have gone back. He should have held him a second time, held him until the end, but the section chief was yelling, "Mercer Gun 3 needs a charge." He had pushed himself up. He had left Silas in the mud. He had run to the next gun. He had not slept beside anyone, held anyone, since "Soldier." The voice cut through the memory like a clean knife. Jonah gasped, his eyes flying open. He was on his knees in the dust of Kestrel Bluff, his back slammed against the water barrel. The tin dipper lay yards away. His heart was a trapped bird, beating itself to death against his ribs. Tallulah was standing in the doorway of the shed. The sun was setting, and she was a silhouette against the red light. "You were gone," she said, her voice flat. He pushed himself up, wiping the grit and cold sweat from his face. He felt hollowed, exposed. A memory, a bad one. She watched him, not with pity, but with a clinical, assessing gaze. He nodded, unable to speak, and went to his quarters. On a small shelf, there was a pine box. Inside it was a single ring, gold with a small pearl, and a letter. He had read it only once, 2 years after the war, from Clara. "I do not know the man who writes these letters. The Jonah I knew loved the county fair and was afraid of spiders. This man writes of inventories and nothing else. I cannot be wife to a ghost who is still walking. I am returning this. I will pray for you." He had felt nothing but a cold, clean relief. He had put the ring in the box, written his letter of transfer, and requested the most remote posting available. He had not been exiled. He had run. He had volunteered for the inventory. He had chosen to guard a warehouse of supplies, because supplies did not talk or touch or die in your arms. He splashed water on his face, the anger at Bracken a cold, clean stone in his gut, steadying him. He went back to the shed. He carried the bucket this time, and a cup. He set them down, just inside the door. She moved to take the cup. As she did, her sleeve, torn from the scuffle in the wash, pulled back from her wrist. He saw it clearly in the last light. A scar, thin and white, ran across the back of her hand, from knuckle to wrist. It was not a ragged wound. It was a single, deliberate knife cut, and just below it, on the soft skin of her inner wrist, was a small, dark tattoo. 3 lines and a triangle, stark and precise. It was not a decoration. It was a mark of service. She saw him looking. She did not hide it. She picked up the cup, drank deeply, and then held her hand out, palm down, offering the scar for inspection. "I was a scout for the traders, before the railroad," she said, her voice quiet. "I led them through the passes, Bracken. He paid for my routes. He did not like my price for the last one." "He did that to you?" Jonah asked. "He taught me his way of negotiating." She said, "I taught him mine. He carries a scar, too, on his face." She let her hand fall. "That is why he does not use me. He has my brother, Kiona. He is 14. He knows the stories. He knows the mountains. Bracken wants the silver in the white lark. The old stories say the tunnels are sacred, that they lead to the heart of the world. Bracken thinks that means silver. He uses my brother as a map, as a key." She looked up, her gaze pinning him. "I did not come to spy. I came to get him. I came alone so Bracken would not see a war party. I came to trade myself for him, or to steal him back." Jonah stood very still. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture he did not want to see. He was a man hollowed by a war he had chosen. She was a woman made sharp by a war that had been forced on her. He ran from ghosts. She was hunting a real, living monster. They were not the same, but they were both survivors. They were not broken, not in the same way. They were changed, hammered into new, unfamiliar shapes by the lives they had been forced to lead. The wind picked up, a low moan from the east. "He will send men," Tallulah said, rising to her feet. "He will check on his guns. He will check on his fort." Jonah moved, a sudden, unfamiliar decisiveness surging through him. He went to the supply shed, not for his rifle, but for a canvas bag. He returned, dumping the contents on the ground. A coil of tripwire and a string of brass mule bells. He started at the main gate, stringing a wire low. "No," she said. She had stepped out of the shed. He did not order her back. "The wind will ring it. It will be a false sound. You will go mad listening." She walked to a spot by the water barrel, an area of hard-packed earth shielded from the main wind. "Here, low. It is in a wind shadow. Only a boot will sound it." She pointed to another gap in the palisade. "And there, by the hard pan. The sound will be different. You will know if it is one man, or two." He looked at her. He looked at the spot. She was right. He had spent months here, but she had read the fort, its currents and its dead zones. In a single day, he said nothing. He knelt and moved the bells. It was the first instruction he had followed in years. It was the first moment of cooperation. As they worked, a new smudge appeared on the dark horizon, far to the oars' quarters, the lamp burning low. He opened his journal, the one he had closed on the truth. He opened it again. He dipped the pencil stub in his mouth, pressing hard. August 4th, a night train. Bracken's. She is telling the truth, if she is telling the truth. I owe her a way home. The night fell, absolute and cold. He lay on his cot, fully dressed. She was in the shed. At her request, he had left the door unbarred. He had given her back her knife. The gap between their 2 sleeping places was only 20 yards of packed earth, but it felt like a mile-wide battlefield. A new, invisible front line. A coyote yelped, a high, lonely cry that was answered by another. Jonah's eyes were gritty. He was drifting, not into sleep, but into a gray, agonizing truce with consciousness. That is when he heard it. It was not the wind. It was not the bells. It was the faint, soft scrush of a boot on the sand, just outside the southern wall. Then another. They were slow, patient. The sound of someone who knew how to move. The sound of someone who was already here. It was not a boot. It was a jingle. A single, metallic tink that sliced through the night. Jonah was on his feet before the sound had faded, his rifle in his hands, his back to the wall of his quarters. The sound had come from the wind shadow, by the water barrel. The bells Tallulah had placed. He moved to the door, peering through a crack in the wood. The courtyard was a sea of ink. The moon just a sliver. He saw nothing. Then, a second jingle, this one from the gap in the palisade. The different sound she had predicted. 2. He breathed. He glanced toward the telegraph shed. The door was open a fraction. He saw her shadow move, a darkness inside the dark. She was not a prisoner. She was a sentry. A shadow detached itself from the main gate, moving with a low, practiced crouch. A second figure hung back, covering the first. They were not soldiers. They moved with the lazy, arrogant confidence of men who bought their skill, bounty hunters. The first man reached the center of the yard. He paused, scanning. He was making for the storehouse, for Bracken's guns. Jonah raised his carbine to his shoulder, the wooden stock smooth and cold against his cheek. He sighted on the man's left boot. He squeezed the trigger. The crack of the shot was deafening, a violation of the fort's long silence. The bullet kicked up a plume of dust 3 inches from the man's foot. "Ha!" the man yelped, leaping back as if bitten by a snake, scrambling behind the horse trough. The second man, near the gate, did not run. He raised his own rifle. "Just a warning," Jonah shouted, his voice a raw croak. "Fort is occupied. Next one goes through bone." He heard a low curse from the trough. "Damn it, Cole, he's awake. Bracken said this post was empty. Said it was just a half-mad ghost." "Shut up," the second man hissed from the gate. The man at the trough, Cole, fired a wild shot toward Jonah's quarters. The bullet thwacked into the adobe wall, harmlessly high. "Soldier." Tallulah's voice was a low command from her shed. "The second man. Where did the sound go?" Jonah paused, his ears ringing. He had been focused on the man he shot at, not the echo. "What?" "The echo, from your shot. Where did it bounce from?" He closed his eyes, replaying the sound, the crack of the carbine, and then the faint, flat pop that came back a second later. It came from the southeast. "It bounced off the ridge," he said. "No," she said. "The ridge is too far. The sound was too fast. It bounced off the hollow, the dry wash." "He's in the wash." "No," she said, and he could hear the patience straining her voice. "He is on the hill above the wash." The sound hit the rock face behind him. "He's on that small bluff, the one that looks like a sitting man." Jonah knew the one, a perfect sniper's perch, overlooking the entire fort. The second man had not been covering the first. He had been getting into position. "Cole," the man on the hill shouted. "Get back, we'll wait for sun." The man at the trough needed no second invitation. He crab-walked backward, firing 2 more useless shots, before bolting for the gate. Jonah heard the clatter of rocks as they scrambled away. Silence fell again, thick and heavy. Jonah let out a breath he did not know he was holding. He was shaking again, but this time it was the sharp, clean adrenaline of a fight, not the cold fog of a memory. They were gone, but they would be back. "They left something," Tallulah said. She was standing in the open door of her shed, her knife in her hand. "How do you know?" "A man who is running in fear does not stop to be careful." She slipped out, moving not like a shadow, but like a part of the wind itself. She was at the gate in 5 seconds. Jonah raised his rifle, covering her, but she was already kneeling. She stood up, holding a small object. She walked back to him, her steps measured, and held it out. It was a strip of navy blue ribbon, tied in a simple knot, the same color as the cloth he had found in the ashes, a railroad marker, a sign to prove they had been there. "They are not army," she said. "They are not bounty hunters." "They are both," Jonah said, the pieces fitting. "Hired guns, paid with railroad money. They wear the cloth but answer to Bracken." The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold dread. "They will come back at dawn. With the light. That man on the hill can pick us off from 500 yards. Then we will not be here when the light comes." Tallulah said. She looked at the courtyard, her head tilted, as if listening to a sound he could not hear. "They think you are one man." "A ghost, alone. They will come for you, the soldier in the barracks." She pointed to her shed. "Give me your rifle." He recoiled. "What?" "Give it to me. I will wait in your quarters. You will wait in the dark, in the salt shed." He understood. A tactical reversal. They would expect the ghost to be in his nest. They would send Cole to the barracks, while the sniper watched the yard. They would be looking for one man. "They will see me move," he protested. "No, first, we set a new stage." She pointed to the center of the yard. "Build a fire, a small one, as if you are making coffee, trying to stay warm after the attack." "A fire, that's insane. They'll see us. They will see what they expect to see. A lone, stupid soldier, rattled and cold. They will move on the fire, but we," she said, pointing to the low, dark shape of the salt storage shed, "will be there, in the dark, at their back." It was a brilliant, simple, and terrifying plan. He was a gunner, used to ranges of 1,000 yards. This was a plan for knives. He did it. He gathered the kindling, his hands fumbling. He struck the match, the tiny flame illuminating his face, making him feel naked and stupidly exposed. He built the small, decoy fire. Then, feeling like the biggest fool in the territory, he handed his carbine to Tallulah. She took it with a steady hand. "The salt shed," she ordered. "Do not move until they are past the fire." She slipped into his quarters. He crawled, his belly in the dust, to the black opening of the salt shed. The air inside was dry, choking, the walls caked with shimmering white crystals. He settled in the deepest shadow, his pistol in his hand, and he waited. It was the longest hour of his life. The fire crackled, a mocking, cheerful sound. The moon crept on, the wind died, and the silence became absolute. He heard it, the scroosh of a boot, the same sound from the night before, but closer now, inside the gate. A shadow moved past the fire. It was Cole. He was holding a Colt revolver, his head darting back and of rocks as they scrambled away. Silence fell again, thick and heavy. Jonah let out a breath he did not know he was holding. He was shaking again, but this time it was the sharp, clean adrenaline of a fight, not the cold fog of a memory. They were gone, but they would be back. "They left something?" Tallulah said. She was standing in the open door of her shed, her knife in her hand. "How do you know?" "A man who is running in fear does not stop to be careful." She slipped out, moving not like a shadow, but like a part of the wind itself. She was at the gate in 5 seconds. Jonah raised his rifle, covering her, but she was already kneeling. She stood up, holding a small object. She walked back to him, her steps measured, and held it out. It was a strip of navy blue ribbon, tied in a simple knot, the same color as the cloth he had found in the ashes. A railroad marker, a sign to prove they had been there. "They are not army," she said. "They are not bounty hunters." "They are both," Jonah said, the pieces fitting. "Hired guns, paid with railroad money. They wear the cloth but answer to Bracken." The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold dread. "They will come back at dawn. With the light, that man on the hill can pick us off from 500 yards. Then we will not be here when the light comes." Tallulah said. She looked at the courtyard, her head tilted, as if listening to a sound he could not hear. "They think you are one man, a ghost, alone. They will come for you, the soldier in the barracks." She pointed to her shed. "Give me your rifle." He recoiled. "What?" "Give it to me." I will wait in your quarters. You will wait in the dark, in the salt shed. He understood. A tactical reversal. They would expect the ghost to be in his nest. They would send Cole to the barracks, while the sniper watched the yard. They would be looking for one man. They will see me move, he protested. No, first, we set a new stage. She pointed to the center of the yard. Build a fire, a small one, as if you are making coffee, trying to stay warm after the attack. A fire, that's insane. They'll see us. They will see what they expect to see. A lone, stupid soldier, rattled and cold. They will move on the fire, but we, she said, pointing to the low, dark shape of the salt storage shed, will be there, in the dark, at their back. It was a brilliant, simple, and terrifying plan. He was a gunner, used to ranges of 1,000 yards. This was a plan for knives. He did it. He gathered the kindling, his hands fumbling. He struck the match, the tiny flame illuminating his face, making him feel naked and stupidly exposed. He built the small, decoy fire. Then, feeling like the biggest fool in the territory, he handed his carbine to Tallulah. She took it with a steady hand. "The salt shed," she ordered. "Do not move until they are past the fire." She slipped into his quarters. He crawled, his belly in the dust, to the black opening of the salt shed. The air inside was dry, choking, the walls caked with shimmering white crystals. He settled in the deepest shadow, his pistol in his hand, and he waited. It was the longest hour of his life. The fire crackled, a mocking, cheerful sound. The moon crept on, the wind died, and the silence became absolute. He heard it, the scrush of a boot, the same sound from the night before, but closer now. Inside the gate, a shadow moved past the fire. It was Cole. He was holding a Colt revolver, his head darting back and forth. He looked at the fire, then at the barracks, then back at the fire. "Stupid damn soldier," he muttered. He started toward the barracks, toward Tallulah and the rifle she was holding. But he was not the only one. Another sound. From his left, the click of a boot heel on stone. A different sound. A different man. Jonah turned his head, agonizingly slow. A man was standing in the doorway of the salt shed. Not Cole. This was a third man. He had not come from the gate. He must have come over the wall. He was tall, wearing a long duster, and he was staring right at Jonah. Jonah's heart stopped. He had been so focused on the plan, on Cole, he had missed the real threat. But the man was not looking at Jonah. He was looking past him. Jonah felt it, a presence, a warmth at his back. Tallulah. She was not in the barracks. She was here, with him, in the dark. She had never gone to the barracks. The rifle was a decoy. She had circled back in the dark and entered the shed from a gap in the rear wall he never knew existed. The man in the doorway raised his pistol. Tallulah moved. She exploded from the darkness beside Jonah. She was not a woman. She was a force. She hit the man in the doorway low, her shoulder driving into his stomach. He grunted, the pistol firing, the shot going wide, splintering the door frame. Jonah was on him. He jammed his own pistol into the man's neck. "Drop it!" The man froze. "Cole, what was that?" A shout from the yard. "Now!" Tallulah snapped at Jonah. She was already moving. Cole was running toward the sound, confused. He rounded the corner of the shed and ran directly into Jonah. It was not a fight. It was a collision. Jonah, fueled by pure, cold panic, slammed his shoulder into the man's chest, shoving him back into the wall. Cole's head hit the adobe with a sick thud. His gun clattered. Jonah grabbed it. He shoved his own balled-up neckerchief into the man's mouth, silencing the groan. The third man, the one from the doorway, was on his knees, gasping, Tallulah's knife at his throat. "Where is the sniper?" she hissed. I don't know," the man gurgled. "Tanner, he's just watching. Cole!" A distant shout from the hill. "Tanner! What in the hell is going on?" Jonah dragged the dazed man, Cole, into the salt shed. Tallulah followed, shoving her prisoner in after him. "We have two," Jonah whispered, his blood pounding. "Tanner is still out there. He will not shoot his own men. Tallulah said, "We have 1 minute." She grabbed the length of rope from the man's belt. She did not tie him. She looped it around his left wrist, yanked it tight, and then, in a move Jonah could not follow, she twisted. She jammed her boot into the man's back, using his body as an anchor. She put her weight onto the rope. The man screamed, a muffled, horrible sound, as his elbow was forced back at an angle it was never meant to take. It was a joint lock, a knot of rope and leverage that controlled a man twice her size. "The bridge," she spat. "The one over the Arroyo del Cuervo. What is the plan?" The man, his face white with pain, sobbed. "Tomorrow, before dawn, Bracken, he's gonna blow it." "Why?" Jonah demanded, pressing the pistol to the man's head. The treaty," the man gasped. "The Owl Canyon Apache, their land, the railroad needs it. If the bridge goes, they blame the Apache. The army comes. The treaty is broken." Jonah felt the blood drain from his face. Bracken was not just clearing land. He was starting a war, and he was using Kestrel Bluff and Jonah's signature as the staging ground. "When? Tomorrow. Before sunrise. The 6 o'clock train. It's full of dignitaries from the railroad. Bracken wants them to see it. See the savage attack. Tanner, I'm coming down." The voice from the hill. Closer now. The sniper was abandoning his post. They were out of time. "We have to go," Tallulah said. She cut the rope, leaving the man in a heap. She grabbed Jonah's arm, her grip like steel. "Go where?" he said, dazed. "We're trapped." "No," she said, pulling him toward the gap in the back of the shed. "You are—" "I am not." She looked at him, her eyes invisible in the pitch black, but he felt their force. "You can stay," she said. "You can stay here in your grave and wait for the sniper. Or you can come with me. You can stop avoiding. You can come and live." She was gone, out the back. Jonah looked at the 2 prisoners, groaning on the salt-caked floor. He looked at the open doorway, where Tanner would be in seconds. He thought of the bridge at Arroyo del Cuervo. He thought of his signature on Bracken's report. For the first time since Shiloh Flats, the fear of staying was greater than the fear of moving. He scrambled out of the gap after her, leaving the fort, the bells, the ghosts, and the man he used to be, behind in the dark. They ran. They did not sprint. They moved with a steady, ground-eating lope. Tallulah leading the way, Jonah following the darker shape against the gray earth. He had left everything. His post, his duty, his carefully constructed prison. Behind them, he heard a furious shout as Tanner must have found the 2 trussed-up bounty hunters in the salt shed. A shot, wild and angry, cracked through the night, but the bullet was lost to the vastness. They were on Mesquite Flats, a wide, open expanse of hard-packed earth and skeletal bushes. To be caught here in the light was to die, but the light was hours away. The immediate threat was the sky. The wind, which had been a low moan, now had a direction. It was coming from the west, a solid, moving wall of air. It was cold, and it carried a new smell. Not just the dry dust of the desert, but the sharp, electric tang of ozone. The smell of wet rock, far on the horizon. A sheet of lightning silently illuminated a range of towering purple-black clouds. A storm was rolling in, a monster of wind and water, and it was moving faster than they were. "This way!" Tallulah's voice was almost snatched away by the first gust. "Quickly!" She veered north, off the flat and into a broken maze of canyons. Jonah's lungs burned. His legs, used to the short perimeter walks of the fort, felt like lead. He was an artilleryman, built for the solid stance of the gun line, not the fluid, endless motion of a scout. He stumbled, his boot catching on a rock. He went down to one knee. The fall sent a jolt of pain up his leg. He was not a ghost. He was just a man, out of shape and terrified. He looked up, expecting her to be gone, a phantom who had left him to his fate. She was 10 feet away, waiting. Her silhouette was taut, angry. "You stop! You die!" The storm will not hide our tracks. It will wash them away for bracken, but Tanner will follow. He is a hunter. He will be on us before the rain." Jonah pushed himself up, his knee screaming. "I am coming." He followed her, forcing his legs to move, falling into a pained, shuffling rhythm. The wind was a physical blow now, howling through the rocks. The first rumble of thunder, a low, gut-vibrating sound, rolled over them. It was not like the sharp crack of a cannon. It was deeper, older. It was the sound of the world's own artillery, and he was on the wrong side of the line. "Here!" she shouted, grabbing his arm. He had been running past it, a shadow in the rock wall, a place where the darkness seemed to be thicker. It was not a cave, but a massive, concave arch of stone, hollowed out by centuries of wind and water. Raven's Arch. It was a shallow sanctuary, perhaps 30 feet deep and 100 feet wide, a protective scoop out of the cliff face. They fell into it, collapsing against the back wall, just as the sky tore open. It was not rain, it was a deluge. A solid, vertical sheet of water that hit the desert floor with the sound of a roaring fire. The wind drove it in sheets, and a cold mist instantly filled their shelter. But the main force of the storm was held back by the stone. In the span of a single minute, the temperature plummeted. Lightning struck, a brilliant blue-white fork that hit the opposite rim of the canyon. The crack of thunder was instantaneous, a deafening explosion that dwarfed any sound of war Jonah had ever known. He pressed himself back, the stone biting into his spine. He was soaked through, his thin soldier's shirt clinging to him like a second, frozen skin. He began to shake. It was not a simple shiver from the cold. It was the old tremor, the one that started in his hands after Shiloh Flats and now lived in his spine. It was the shaking of a man whose nerves had been permanently frayed, rattled loose by too much noise, too much fear. Tallulah was next to him, her own blanket wrapped tight. She was shivering too, but with a controlled, steady rhythm. She was watching him. His teeth chattered. He tried to grip his knees, to still his body by force of will. But it only made it worse. "You are cold," she stated. "Just cold." He lied. She moved, just a foot closer. The storm was a curtain of noise, isolating them in their small, dark space. She reached out, her hand moving with a slow, deliberate motion. She did not touch his face or his arm. She laid her palm flat on his chest, over his heart. Her hand was small, damp, but it was warm. It was an anchor. Jonah flinched, his entire body tensing at the contact. It was the first human touch he had not recoiled from since before the war. He stared at her. His breathing stopped. "Your heart is strong," she said, her voice low. Just for him, beneath the roar of the rain. "It is beating. Hard. Not an empty shell. Not a ghost." It was a direct refutation of his life, of the lie he had built around himself. This woman, this captive who was now his rescuer, had seen him in the dark. The words, the ones from his journal, the ones that had defined his isolation, were pulled from him. "I haven't," he began, his voice a hoarse, shaking whisper. "I haven't slept. I haven't slept beside a woman since the war." He said it. He said it out loud. And it was not a boast of a hardened man. It was the terrified confession of a child in the dark. It meant, I don't know how. It meant I am afraid. It meant I am broken. Tallulah did not pull her hand away. Her dark eyes, barely visible, held his. She was reading the fear. She was reading the shame. And she did not look away. She began to move. Not quickly, not with hunger. She moved with the same slow, deliberate pace she had used when taking water from his spoon. It was a movement that gave him all the power, every opportunity to say no, to pull away, to bolt. She slid closer, the space between them shrinking from a foot, 2 inches. He could feel the heat of her body, a small furnace against the icy wind. Her gaze never left his, and in it, he saw no pity. He saw agreement. He saw a shared understanding. She stopped, her knee brushing his. She was close enough that her breath, warm and smelling of the desert, ghosted his cheek. She waited. It was his turn. He could lean away, and she would stop. He could stay rigid, and she would stop. He did neither. He, the man who had run from all human contact, did the one thing he had not done in a decade. He let out the breath he had been holding, and his body, his rigid, fortress-like body, sagged. He did not move toward her, but he stopped moving away. It was the only permission she needed. She moved again, her hands sliding from his heart, up his chest, to his neck. Her fingers were cool, but they were firm. She cupped the back of his neck, her thumb finding the frantic pulse there. Jonah's eyes slid shut. A sound, half groan, half sob, was trapped in his throat. She leaned in, her other hand coming to rest on his shoulder. She brought her face close, and her forehead, cool and smooth, pressed against his. It was not a kiss. It was an anchor. It was a connection. He could feel her pulse, or his own. A shared rhythm in the dark. The roar of the thunder, the shriek of the wind, the memory of the cannons. They were still there, but they were not inside him. They were outside, inside. There was only this, the smell of rain on her hair, the solid, living presence of her, the astonishing, terrifying, healing weight of her hand on his skin. His own hands, the scarred, shaking hands of a gunner, came up. They did not grab, they did not clutch. They moved with a slow, unfamiliar reverence. One hand found her shoulder, the other found her waist. He was not pulling her. He was just holding. He was learning the shape of a person again. The rigidity in his back, the iron plates he had worn for years, began to dissolve. The shaking did not stop, but it changed. It was no longer the tremor of fear. It was the shaking of a thaw. She shifted, just slightly, and he felt her lips brush his. It was a question. He answered. He tilted his head, a fractional movement, and their lips met. It was not the kiss of passion. It was not the kiss of hunger or of conquering. It was the kiss of two survivors in the dark. It was salt and rainwater and a shared, desperate breath. It was a promise, not of forever, but of now. A promise that they were both, in this one single moment, alive. He felt the tension in her body ease, and in response, he drew her closer. He pulled her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her, her body fitting against his. He buried his face in her damp hair, and for the first he felt the tension in her body ease, and in response, he drew her closer. He pulled her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her, her body fitting against his. He buried his face in her damp hair, and for the first time since Silas died in the mud, he held someone, and this time, he did not let go. They stayed like that, a single, shivering form against the stone, wrapped in his blanket and her shawl. The storm raged, but the arch held. They did not speak. There was nothing to say. He was just listening. He was listening to the rain, a clean, washing sound, and not the percussive, tearing sound of artillery. He was listening to her breathing, a quiet, steady rhythm against his chest. After a long time, as the storm began to pass, as the roar faded to a steady drum, she stirred. She did not pull away, but lifted her head. "In my tribe," she whispered, her voice thick. "When a man walks in his sleep, when he is lost in a dream of the past, we do not shake him." He listened, his body still, his arms still holding her. "We whisper his name. We call him back to the world that is, we call him home." She put her head back down on his chest, her hand over his heart. She closed her eyes. "Jonah," she whispered. "Jonah! Jonah!" He held her, the name echoing in the quiet. He felt the last of the tremors fade, replaced by a profound, terrifying, and absolute calm. He closed his own eyes. He did not sleep, not truly, but for the first time in years, he rested. When the first pale gray light of dawn touched the world, he was still holding her. The storm was over. The rain had stopped. The air was cold and impossibly clean. He looked out from the arch. The desert was transformed, It was a world of running water, of dark, wet stone, and from the damp earth, a thick white mist was rising, like smoke from 1,000 quenched fires. It was a new day, and it brought with it a new, dangerous mission. He looked down at the woman in his arms, her face peaceful in the dawn light. He had heard his name. He was no longer a ghost. He was Jonah, and he had a bridge to save. The mist of the past storm clung to the world, making ghosts of the rock and the land. They reached the Arroyo del Cuervo an hour after sunrise, the air cold and smelling of wet iron. The bridge was a monster of new-cut timber, a skeletal scar across the landscape, spanning a canyon 100 feet deep where a muddy, post-storm current now raged. The railroad tracks glittered, wet in the new light. "They will be here soon," Tallulah said. She pointed not to the bridge, but to a small, single-room signal house, perched on the canyon's rim 50 yards from the crossing. "That is where the man with the fire will be." "You check the house," Jonah said, the soldier in him taking over, the mission clarifying his mind. "I'll check the structure. Look for the charge." He slid down the muddy embankment, moving under the bridge. He was an artilleryman. He knew explosives. He knew where to put them for maximum effect. He would have mined the main supports, the load-bearing joints where the trestles met the canyon wall. He found them in seconds. It was not a subtle job. It was arrogant. 2 large kegs of blasting powder, the kind used for clearing tunnels, were wedged into the timber frame on the far side. They were roped in place. Wires ran from them. Not wires, he saw, but fuses, thick, black, professional-grade safety fuses, wrapped in tarred twine, all leading to a single, central line. He followed the line with his eyes. It snaked up the timbers, over the edge, and disappeared into the mud. Heading straight for the signal house, he climbed back up the slick bank, his heart a cold, hard knot. He found Tallulah at the door of the signal house. She was kneeling. "The mud is clear," she said. 3 sets of boots, all the same." She pointed to a perfect, deep impression near the door. In the center of the heel, pressed into the mud, was a logo the crossed bugles and eagle of the Meridian Pacific. "They are not even hiding it," Jonah said, his voice grim. The door was unlocked. Inside, the small hut was a simple depot. A telegraph key that was not connected, coils of wire, empty crates, and a small cot on a rough wooden table. A shipping manifest lay open, weighted down by a bottle of whiskey. Jonah picked it up. It was a transfer slip. 2 kegs, blasting powder, 6 coils. Fuse. Received. It was signed at the bottom. The ink arrogant and black. In a looping, aggressive script he now recognized. H. Bracken. The date, in the corner, was yesterday's. "He signed for it," Jonah whispered. The audacity of it was staggering. Bracken was not just a criminal. He was a warlord. He was keeping records. "Jonah." Tallulah's voice was different. It was not sharp or tactical. It was low, and it was shaking with a feeling he could not name. She was at the door, her fingers tracing something on the wooden frame, just below the latch. He moved to her side. There, carved into the soft pine, was a small, rough drawing. It was a bird, a sparrow, and one of its wings was carved wrong, bent at an angle, as if broken. "It is his sign," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the carving. "Kiona's. He carves them. He carves them on everything. When he is afraid, it means, I am here. I am hurt, but I am here." She leaned her forehead against the door frame, her body rigid. He was alive. He was here. Just yesterday. Forced to watch or to help as Bracken prepared to slaughter his own people. And then, from far down the canyon, a sound that split the morning. A long, high whistle. Jonah's blood went cold. He looked out the window. Miles down the track, a black speck, trailing a plume of white steam. It was the train. The 6 o'clock train. The train full of dignitaries. It was coming. He had maybe 20 minutes. He ran from the hut, back to the embankment. Tallulah right behind him. He slid down to the fuses, pulling his knife. His hands were shaking. It was not the cold, it was the whistle. It was the sound of Shiloh, the sound of the train bringing reinforcements, the sound of a timeline, the sound of Silas bleeding in the mud, the sound of the world narrowing to a single, impossible point of failure. The tremor, his old, hated companion, was back. His hands were shaking so badly he could not get the knife to the fuse. He would cut his own hand. He would drop the knife. He was failing. "Stop!" It was her voice. Behind him, he squeezed his eyes shut. "I cannot," he grated, the words torn from him. I can't. The shaking." He felt her move. He expected a curse, an accusation. Instead, he felt a warmth, a sudden, firm pressure on the back of his neck, just below his skull. Her hand, she was not rubbing. She was not comforting. She was just holding a simple, solid, human anchor. "Breathe," she commanded, her voice low in his ear. "I am here. Your hand is steady." He opened his eyes. The world was still there. The raging water, the black fuse. He felt the pulse in his own neck, thrumming against her palm, and he felt her pulse, a faint, steady beat in her fingertips. He took a breath. The shaking. It did not stop, but it receded. It became a tremor, not an earthquake. His hand, guided by her will, became a tool. He sliced the main fuse, leaving a useless 3-foot tail. He took the cut, long end, and ran back to the signal house. "Buy me 1 minute," he said. He found what he needed. In the corner, a canvas bag full of sand, used for ballast. Outside, a half-burnt fire from Bracken's men. He scooped ash and soot into the bag. He grabbed the coil of spare fuse. He worked with the speed of a gunner drilling for inspection. He jammed a new short fuse into the bag of sand and ash. He placed it in the center of the path, halfway between the bridge and the signal house. He ran the long fuse from the bridge, not to the bag. He worked with the speed of a gunner drilling for inspection. He jammed a new short fuse into the bag of sand and ash. He placed it in the center of the path, halfway between the bridge and the signal house. He ran the long fuse from the bridge, not to the bag, but from the bag, laying it in the open, leading to the signal house. It was a decoy, a performance. "The spark," he said. "It needs to be loud." He took a handful of .44 shells from his pocket, the ones from the fort. He dumped the powder from 5 of them into the sandbag. "It will not be a bomb. It will be a mess." "They are coming," Tallulah said from the door. He heard it, horses moving fast. "Get in the hut and bar the door." He said, "No," she said. "We hide, the way we did before. In the open." She pointed to the embankment, to the deep, muddy ditch carved by the storm, just below the tracks. "They will go for the hut. They will light the fuse and watch from there. We will be at their backs." It was the salt shed all over again. They slid into the ditch. It was a cold, wet grave, smelling of mud and iron. They were hidden, but they would see everything. Seconds later, 4 horses thundered into the clearing. Bracken was in the lead, his long duster coat flapping. He was laughing, looking back at the 3 men with him. One of them was Tanner, the sniper. "Right on schedule," Bracken boomed. "Dismounting." He looked at the train, now a clear, chugging shape, maybe 2 miles off. "They will have a perfect view of the fireworks, and of the Apache arrows we left in the timbers. Get in the house, Tanner," Bracken ordered. "Keep your rifle on the tracks. If any Apache do show up, make sure they are seen." He strode to the fuse line, the one Jonah had laid. He did not even check it. He pulled a match from his pocket, struck it on his boot heel. "Gentlemen," he said, touching the flame to the fuse, "welcome to the New West." The fuse caught, sparking and hissing, burning fast toward the sandbag. Bracken and his other 2 men stepped back, their faces turned toward the bridge, waiting for the massive explosion. The fuse reached the bag. The result was not a boom. It was a wet, flat thwoomp. A single, massive cloud of black, sooty, sandy gray smoke erupted from the bag. The pop was no louder than a champagne cork. The cloud, however, was enormous. It was a dirty, choking fog that, driven by the canyon's updraft, instantly enveloped all three men. The air was filled with coughing, choking, and a furious, disbelieving stream of curses. "What in the cough? Where? I can't see." "Now," Tallulah said. They were out of the ditch, two shapes of mud and fury. Tallulah went for the horses. Jonah went for the men. He hit the first man, who was stumbling blind, with a shoulder tackle that sent him sprawling. The second man swung his rifle, but Jonah was already inside his guard, his fist connecting with the man's jaw. Bracken was already through the worst of the smoke. He saw Jonah. He saw his plan in ruins. His face, now streaked with soot, was a mask of pure, murderous rage. He clawed for his pistol, but Tallulah was there. She had cut the reins of the other horses. They were scattering, terrified. She threw a rock, hard, striking Bracken's horse in the flank. The animal reared, screaming. Bracken, his foot half in the stirrup, was thrown. He rolled, came up, and saw he was trapped. He was on foot, his men were down, and Jonah was advancing. He did the only thing he could. He grabbed the heavy leather satchel from his saddle. The one thing he had not left, he hurled it, not at Jonah, but at Jonah's feet. "Take it, soldier," he snarled, Jonah's feet. "Take it, soldier," he snarled. "It's all you're good for." Jonah instinctively flinched, stopping to avoid the missile. It was the only opening Bracken needed. He turned and ran, not for the tracks, but for the rocks, scrambling like a goat toward the high ridges, toward the White Lark mine. Jonah raised his pistol. He had a clear shot. He could end it. "No," Tallulah said, her hand on his arm. "Not like that. We need him. For Kiona." He lowered the gun, the smoke burning his lungs. The two bounty hunters were groaning. One unconscious, Tanner, hearing the commotion, had run from the hut and, seeing his boss fleeing, simply kept running, disappearing over the ridge. The train whistle shrieked. Much closer now, a sound of shrill panic. The engineer must have seen the smoke. Jonah looked at the bridge. It was black, solid, and completely, beautifully intact. The sun was just beginning to crest the ridge, and the light hit the wet timbers. He had held the line. He looked down at the satchel Bracken had thrown. He knelt, his knees sinking in the mud. He unbuckled the straps. It was not gold. It was not guns. It was paper, maps, dozens of them, survey maps of the railroad's intended path, with a red line drawn straight through the Owl Canyon Reservation. And beneath them, a ledger. He opened it. Names, dates, amounts. He saw the name of the magistrate at Fort Meridian. He saw the name of a U.S. senator. He saw the name of his old commanding officer. It was a list of bribes, a record of the entire conspiracy. The train was screeching to a halt just before the bridge, steam hissing. Men in dark suits were spilling out, looking in confusion at the smoking sandbag and the muddy, armed soldier. Jonah Mercer stood, the book in his hand, and looked at the intact bridge. He had passed a test he did not know he was taking. He turned to Tallulah. She was not looking at the bridge, or the train, or the men. She was staring at the high, distant ridge where Bracken had disappeared. Her face was granite. The bridge was safe. Her tribe was safe. For today. But her brother was still in the mountain, and the man who had taken him had just been shown to be a coward. "He will be careless now," she said. "He is angry. He will make a mistake." She looked at Jonah, her eyes clear. "We go to the White Lark." The White Lark mine was a black mouth in the side of the mountain, exhaling a cold, damp breath that smelled of rust and stone. They had left the dignitaries and the train far behind, tracking Bracken through the wash, then up the steep, rocky incline. The tracks were hurried, sloppy. He was angry, and he was running for his last sanctuary. Jonah lit the oil lantern he had taken from the signal house. The small, yellow flame pushed back the oppressive dark by only a few feet, revealing a low, narrow tunnel shored up with the rotting timbers. The air was dead. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water, A sound like a clock counting down in the dark. "He is in here," Tallulah whispered, her voice barely a breath. "With my brother." "Stay behind the light," Jonah said. He held the lantern high with his left hand, his pistol in his right. They moved in, their footsteps muffled by the damp. Gritty floor. The mine was a labyrinth, with side tunnels branching off into absolute blackness. It was a perfect place for an ambush. "Wait," Jonah said. He stopped, holding up a hand. The lantern light had caught a dull gleam, almost invisible, stretched across the tunnel at shin height. A tripwire. He knelt, bringing the light closer. It was a thin wire, almost new, leading to a bundle of rotting canvas in the shadows by the wall. "A scattergun," he whispered, his blood running cold. An old soldier's trick, a booby trap. He knew the mechanics of it. He followed the wire with his eyes to the trigger mechanism. He could not cut it. The jolt might be enough. He needed to block the hammer. He holstered his pistol, pulled the bayonet from his belt. He motioned for Tallulah to hold the lantern, to aim it steadily at the device. He lay on his belly in the mud, the cold seeping into his shirt. He could smell the rancid grease on the trigger mechanism. He extended the bayonet, his hand. For once, perfectly steady. The mission was too clear, too precise, to allow for ghosts. He slid the flat of the blade between the percussion cap and the firing hammer. A solid block of steel. "Done," he breathed, sliding back. "It's wedged. We can step over." Tallulah did not move. She was pulling something from her pocket. It was a small, soft lump of red chalk, the kind used for marking ore. She knelt and drew a clear, bright arrow on the tunnel floor, pointing back the way they had come, a way out. She moved to the side tunnel. "This way," she said. "How do you know?" "The air," she said. "It moves. He's deeper in. He needs to breathe." She was right. He could feel it now. A faint, almost imperceptible current. She was marking their path. A red line through the maze, leading them out and leading them in. They continued, stepping over the useless wire. The dripping sound grew louder, echoing. Then another sound, a low, muffled groan, as if from underwater. Tallulah froze. Her head snapped toward a side tunnel, this one shored up with newer wood. "Kiona," she breathed, the name a prayer and a curse. They ran, all caution gone. They rounded a corner into a larger chamber, a place where the miners had clearly stored supplies. Crates, barrels, and in the far corner, a small, bound figure. Tallulah started, but Jonah grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "It is too easy," he hissed. "It is my brother." She tore free, her knife in her hand. She was halfway across the room before the voice came. Touching, truly, a family reunion set by lamplight. Holt Bracken stepped out from behind a stack of powder kegs. He was wearing the fine, navy blue railroad coat, the one that matched the ribbon. It was buttoned high, a gentleman's coat, but his face was streaked with soot and his eyes were wild. He was holding a heavy dragoon revolver, and it was aimed at Tallulah. "I knew you would follow," he sneered. "The righteous savage, coming for her kin, and you, the broken soldier. 2 lost souls, come to die in my vault." Tallulah stopped, her body a coiled spring, the knife held low. Kiona, gagged, whimpered from the corner. Bracken laughed. "You see, this is my fort, Mercer, not that shack in the desert. This is my armory, my bank, and you have brought me the only thing I was missing." "Let the boy go, Bracken," Jonah said, his pistol trained on the man's chest. "It's over." "Over." Bracken's laugh was a sharp bark. "It has just begun." He fired. The sound was a solid, deafening blast that filled the cavern, shaking dust from the ceiling. Jonah had not aimed for the man. He had aimed for the light. He had been a gunner. He knew how to fire. He had fired past Bracken's head. The bullet struck the stone wall, sending a spray of rock chips into the man's face. Bracken yelled, flinching, his own shot going wide, smashing into a barrel. "Now!" Jonah roared at Tallulah. He did not fire again. He threw the lantern. It was an underhand toss, the same motion for loading a field piece. The glass lantern cartwheeled through the air, hit the wall above Bracken's head, and shattered. Burning oil rained down on the dry, ancient timbers. The fire was immediate. It was not a flame, it was an explosion. The oil-soaked wood wombed into life, a wall of orange fire erupting between them and Bracken. "Kiona!" Tallulah screamed. She was already moving, rolling under the flames before they could spread. To get to her brother. "Fool!" Bracken roared, his voice thick with panic and smoke. The fire was spreading, climbing the timbers, eating the oxygen. "You've killed us all." He did not run for the exit. He ran deeper into the mine, toward a side passage, but not before grabbing the leather satchel he had dropped. The ledger, the list of names. Jonah was on his feet, the smoke burning his lungs. The roof was groaning, the sound of a ship breaking apart. Timbers, on fire, began to fall. He saw Tallulah. She had cut Kiona free. The boy was thin, terrified, but he was on his feet. "This way!" she yelled, pointing to the passage Bracken had taken. "It is the only way." "He'll be waiting," Jonah shouted back. "We will be faster." She grabbed her brother's hand. She ran, a low, fast arrow, straight into the smoke. Jonah followed. He no longer had a pistol. He had his bayonet. He ran, his head down, the heat scorching his back. The sound of the collapsing mine was the sound of the world ending. They moved in the smoke, a three-person team. Tallulah in the lead, Kiona in the middle, Jonah at the rear. It was not a retreat. It was an assault. He felt his steps fall into rhythm with hers, her quick, short strides, his own longer, ground-covering pace. They were a battle pair, moving without words, driven by the same singular purpose. They burst through the smoke into a final, large cavern. It was a dead end, but a small, bright rectangle of blue sky was visible high above, a ventilation shaft, a way out. Bracken was there. He was scrambling at the pile of rubble, trying to climb. The satchel was slung across his chest. He turned, his face a mask of soot and terror, his pistol coming up, but he was not fast enough. Tallulah was on him. She did not go for the gun. She went for the man, her knife flashing. "No!" Bracken screamed. He did not fire. He did not have time. He did the last, most cowardly thing. He grabbed Kiona, who was standing between them, and yanked the boy in front of him, a human shield. "Kiona!" Tallulah skidded to a halt, the point of her knife inches from her brother's throat. Bracken held the boy, his arm hooked around Kiona's neck. He pressed the muzzle of his pistol to the boy's temple. "Drop it!" Bracken panted, his eyes wild. "Drop the knife or I kill him! I swear to God, I'll kill him!" Tallulah stood, frozen. Her arm was trembling, the knife held in a white-knuckled grip. She was a warrior, but she was a sister, and she was trapped. Jonah stepped out of the smoke. His pistol was gone. He held only the bayonet, a useless, short blade. "Everyone," Jonah said, his voice surprisingly calm. The roar of the fire, the collapsing timbers. It was all just noise. He was back. He was at his gun. He was clear. "Bracken," he said, taking a step forward. "Stay back. Soldier, I'll do it." "I know," Jonah said. He took another step. He looked at Tallulah. Her eyes were locked on him, wide with a silent, desperate question. He let the bayonet drop from his hand. It clattered on the stone. He held his empty hands up. "It's me you want," Jonah said, his voice reasonable, almost gentle. "She's just an Apache. The boy is worthless. I'm the one. The soldier who signed your paper. The man who ruined your plan." He took another step. He was 10 feet away. "Let the boy go," Jonah said, "and drop the knife." It was a strange command. Tallulah was the one with the knife. Bracken's eyes, confused, flickered to Jonah. What did you say?" "I said," Jonah continued, taking one more step, "drop the knife. Let me take it. Let me be the one." Bracken's mind, panicked and reeling, tried to make sense of the words. He was looking at Jonah, at the new threat, the new offer. His grip on Kiona, his focus on Tallulah. It wavered. For half a second, his world shifted to the soldier. It was all Tallulah needed. She did not drop the knife. She did not attack. She moved. Her left hand, a blur, snapped out and grabbed Bracken's gun wrist. Her right hand, the one with the knife, did not stab. She dropped the knife and, with the same hand, seized Bracken's thumb. Then she twisted. It was a fluid, brutal, and economic motion. A joint lock, a leverage-based break. Bracken roared, a high, thin scream as his wrist was turned at an impossible angle. His fingers flew open. The gun dropped. His arm, holding Kiona, went limp. Kiona was free. At the exact same instant, Jonah moved. He did not go for Bracken. He did not go for the gun. He lunged for Bracken's other hand, the one that had been fumbling at his belt. In it was a small tin box, a detonator. He was going to blow the shaft. Jonah's hand clamped down on the tin, his fingers locking with Bracken's. He ripped it free, the force of his pull spinning Bracken around, straight into the rock wall. A sound, like a thunderclap, shook the cavern. A massive, burning timber crashed down, separating them from the passage, sealing the mine. "The shaft!" Tallulah screamed, grabbing Kiona, shoving him toward the light. "Go, go!" They scrambled, clawed, climbed. Jonah shoved Kiona up the rubble. Tallulah climbed, pulling her brother. Jonah was last, his boots slipping, the heat of the fire scorching his back. He grabbed Tallulah's outstretched hand. She pulled. They burst out, tumbling from the black, smoking hole into the blinding, clean, cold light of day. They collapsed onto the wet earth, a tangle of limbs, gasping, coughing, sucking in the sweet, clean air. Below them, the mountain groaned. The shaft collapsed. A plume of black smoke and dust erupting from the hole they had just escaped. They lay there for a long time, the only sound their own ragged, desperate breathing. Kiona was the first to stir. He was crying, silent, terrified tears. Tallulah pulled him close, her hand in his hair, whispering his name. "Kiona! Kiona! Kiona!" Jonah pushed himself to his elbows. He looked at Bracken, who had been dragged out, last, by Jonah. He was a heap, his face pale, his wrist held at a sick angle. Jonah looked at the blue ribbon, the railroad marker, still tied to a button on Bracken's ruined coat. He pulled it free. He used it to tie the man's one good hand to his feet. Then, Jonah Mercer did a thing he had not done in a decade. He laughed. It was not a good sound. It was a rusty, painful, hacking noise, torn from a place that had been sealed shut. It was the sound of a man who had faced cannons, and ghosts, and fire, and had, for the first time, lived. He laughed until his lungs burned, and he lay back in the mud, staring at the empty blue sky, still alive. The journey to Seraphine Wells was a descent. They came down from the high, clean rock of the White Lark into the grit and noise of the New World. Seraphine Wells was not a town. It was a wound, a raw collection of fresh-cut pine, canvas tents, and muddy ruts that served as streets. It had sprung up in 3 months, following the railroad line, and it smelled of whiskey, coal smoke, and unwashed men. They were a strange procession. Jonah, his uniform torn and caked with mud, his face still streaked with soot. Tallulah, walking with a straight-backed, regal defiance, her knife back in its sheath. Kiona, silent, his eyes wide, holding his sister's hand, and between them, Holt Bracken, his hands bound with his own blue railroad ribbon, his face a mask of sullen, defeated fury, his broken wrist cradled against his chest. The train they had saved had beaten them there. It sat at the terminus, hissing, and the men in dark suits, the railroad dignitaries, were the ones in charge. When they saw Jonah's party emerge from the wash, they descended, a flock of angry crows. "That's him! That's the scoundrel!" one of them shouted, pointing at Bracken. "He tried to have us all killed." A crowd gathered, rough-looking men, railroad laborers with pick handles in their hands, saloon girls, a few pale-faced merchants. They were angry, confused, and smelled an execution. "We need the law," a suit-wearing man demanded. "The law? Hell!" a worker spat. "We need a rope." "There will be no hanging," Jonah said, his voice a low, gravelly thing. He was exhausted, but the artilleryman's clarity was still on him. He shoved Bracken toward the town's largest, ugliest building, the Seraphine Saloon Hotel. "We need a magistrate." The crowd surged in after them. The saloon, smelling of stale beer and sawdust, became a makeshift courtroom. The man they found was Judge Dawson. He was a small, sweaty man in a fine waistcoat, halfway through a plate of eggs. He looked at the armed soldier, the Apache woman, the bound boy, and the furious railroad barons, and he looked like a man who wished he had chosen another profession. "What is the meaning of this?" he blustered, dabbing his mouth. "This is an irregular proceeding." "The proceeding," Jonah said, "is a charge of attempted murder and conspiracy to break a federal treaty." He unslung the heavy leather satchel. He let it fall onto the judge's table, scattering the silverware. It landed with a dull, heavy thud. "What is that?" Dawson asked, his eyes wary. "Holt Bracken's records." Jonah said. He opened the flap and pulled out the ledger. He kept them, like a good quartermaster. One of the railroad men, a vice president named Harper, snatched the book. He was the one who had been duped, and he was the one with the most to lose. He flipped it open. The room went silent. He began to read. He read the list of names. A senator, a U.S. Marshal, a supply chief at Fort Meridian. He read the amounts, the transfers, the consulting fees. He read the contract, a private one, for the forced removal of the Owl Canyon Apache to clear the way for a new, unapproved rail line. He read the inventory of guns and powder. He read the plan to blow the Arroyo del Cuervo bridge, to blame the savages and force the army to break the treaty. The saloon was as quiet as a church. The only sound was Harper's voice, growing tighter and more furious with every name. When he finished, he slammed the book shut. This is an outrage. This man," he pointed at Bracken, "is a traitor and a fiend." The crowd roared. "Hang him!" "Now, wait just a moment," Judge Dawson said, holding up a trembling hand. He was sweating freely now. He kept looking, not at Bracken, but at a dark corner of the saloon. 3 men were standing there, drinking whiskey. Their dusters pulled back to show the Colts on their hips, Tanner, the sniper, and the other 2 who had fled the bridge. They were watching the judge. We must respect the process," Dawson stammered. "This evidence it's just paper. We only have the word of this soldier and her." He gestured to Tallulah, a flick of his hand. "She is an Apache. Her testimony is inadmissible in a case against a white man." The saloon grew quiet again. The men at the bar watched. Bracken almost smiled. Tallulah stepped forward. She moved past Jonah, past the table, and stood in the center of the room. She was not loud. She did not yell. Her voice was clear, and it cut through the smoke and the smell of whiskey. "He says I am Apache," she said, her English perfect, each word a stone. He says I cannot speak, but I am speaking." She looked at the railroad workers, the men with calluses on their hands. "You lay the track, you drive the spike. You are paid in dollars." "What was he paid?" She pointed at Bracken. "He was paid to take a land that is not his. He was paid to kill your families, the men on that train, to get that land. He was paid to start a war so he could buy the ashes." She turned her gaze on Judge Dawson, who flinched. "You call it war. You call it policy. You call it progress. You hide behind these words. I call it greed." She rested her hand on the ledger. "This is not a book of war. It is a book of prices. He found the price for your senator. He found the price for your soldiers. He tried to buy my brother." She looked at the crowd, her eyes holding every one of them. "There is no Apache side here. There is only a man who burns bridges, and the people who get caught in the fire. He set the fire. We are the proof." A murmur went through the crowd. It was not a roar of anger. It was a low, dangerous rumble of understanding. The railroad workers, the ones who had seen their own wages stolen by company men, nodded. They knew greed when they saw it. One of the railroad men, Harper, turned on Jonah. His face was red. "This is all well and good, but you, soldier, Kestrel Bluff, that ledger, it mentions payments for your post. It mentions reports you signed. Your signature is on the first bounty slips. How do we know you were not his man all along?" The crowd turned, their suspicion a tangible thing. Jonah was the outsider, the soldier. He was part of the system that had allowed this. Jonah looked at their faces, the anger, the doubt. He looked at Tallulah, who was watching him, her face calm. She had told her truth. Now it was his turn. He did not deny it. He did not make excuses. He reached into his own torn shirt and pulled out his small, leather-bound journal. The cover was scarred, the pages warped by the damp. He opened it. He fumbled for the page, the one he had written at Kestrel Bluff. I was an artilleryman," he said, his voice quiet, forcing the saloon to strain to hear him. "At Shiloh Flats. My guns. We fired for 36 hours. After that, I could not be near people." He looked at the page, at his own jagged pencil marks. "Holt Bracken knew that. He brought me bounty slips, transfer reports. I was the quartermaster of a ghost fort, and He took a breath. "I signed them. I signed them all. I did not read them. I just wanted the men, the noise, the world, to leave me alone." He looked up, his eyes finding Harper's. "I was a coward. I was a ghost. I was avoiding, and I was wrong. That," he tapped the journal, "was my failure, my sin." He then pointed, his fingers shaking, but not with a tremor, with a cold, hard rage, at Holt Bracken. "But that," he roared, his voice suddenly the parade ground bellow of a gunnery chief, "is his crime. I was a fool. He is a monster. I signed paper. He tried to burn the world." The saloon exploded. The confession, the raw, unvarnished honesty of it, had done what Tallulah's logic could not. It had broken the last barrier. The railroad workers surged forward, their faces dark. "He's right, it's Bracken." The three men at the bar, Tanner and his crew, saw the tide turn. They did not run. They melted. They simply set down their glasses, and in the chaos, slipped out the back door of the saloon. The night was tense. Judge Dawson, seeing his hired guns were gone and the crowd was on the edge of a riot, had placed Bracken in the town's only cell, a reinforced ice house, to await a decision. Jonah, Tallulah, and Kiona were given rooms in the hotel above the saloon, for their protection. Kiona, exhausted, had fallen asleep instantly. Jonah and Tallulah stood at the window, watching the town. They saw them, Tanner and the other two, emerging from the alley, moving low and fast toward the stables. They were fleeing. "They are getting away," Jonah said, his hand going to the pistol he had taken from Bracken's man. "Wait," Tallulah said. She touched his arm. She pointed. Kiona, who had been asleep, was now at the window with them. He was not afraid. He was pointing, a small smile on his face. A shadow detached itself from the side of the smithy. Then a third appeared on the roof of the stables. They were men from Owl Canyon, Tallulah's people. They had been tracking her. They had been watching. It was not a fight. It was a harvest. The three scouts moved in. There was a scuffle, no louder than a dog fight, a muffled curse, the sound of a rope being pulled taut. It was over in 30 seconds. The scouts did not kill them. They hogtied Tanner and his men and left them in the middle of the street. Then they melted back into the shadows. 10 minutes later, a bewildered army patrol, in town for supplies, found them and took them into custody. The next morning, Judge Dawson was a new man. He was bright, cheerful, and full of judicial fury. The saloon was packed. "In light of the overwhelming evidence," he declared, "and the clear and present danger this man, Holt Bracken, represents, I am ordering him expelled from this territory. He will be remanded to federal custody. to be tried for his crimes against the Meridian Pacific Railroad and the United States government. He smiled, triumphant. He had picked the winning side. His assets, he added, are hereby frozen, pending the federal investigation. A cheer went up. The railroad men clapped. It was over. Harper, the vice president, turned to Jonah. "Soldier," he said, his voice full of authority. "A job well done. We are indebted. That patrol reports your post at Kestrel Bluff was compromised, burned by vagrants. Your orders are, therefore, suspended." Jonah felt a sudden, dizzying wave of relief. He was free. However, Harper continued, "This prisoner, Bracken, must be transported to Fort Meridian to begin his federal journey. It is a 100-mile ride, and my men are not soldiers. You are." It was not a request. It was an order, given by a man who bought and sold senators. "You will escort the prisoner. Fort Meridian, the crowds, the paperwork, the commanders he had fled, the past." Jonah stood, frozen. He looked at Harper. He looked at the cheering town, and then he looked at Tallulah. She was standing by the door with Kiona, her hand on her brother's shoulder. She was ready to leave. Her path went north, to Owl Canyon. His, he was just told, went south. The road had split, a fork he could not avoid. Before he could answer, the saloon doors burst open. It was the saloon owner, a wide man with a grin. "He's guilty. He's gone. The town is safe. It's lantern night. Friends, the market is open. Drinks are on the house. We celebrate." The crowd surged out, a wave of relief and joy. Someone was already stringing up the paper lanterns, small, bright globes of yellow and red oil, bobbing in the breeze like new stars. The town of Seraphine Wells, which had been a map of muddy roads and half-built structures, was transformed. The night market was a river of light. Paper lanterns, painted red and gold, hung from every new awning and porch, their oil flames casting a warm, flickering glow that banished the cold desert shadows. The noise was a soft, human roar. The chatter of the railroad men spending their pay, the merchants calling out their wares, and the sound, clear and sweet, of a lone fiddle playing a slow, simple tune. Jonah stood at the edge of it all, near the saloon doors. He felt like a man on a shoreline, afraid to get his feet wet. The noise, the lights, the sheer number of people, it was a sensory assault. He could feel the old tightness in his back. The artilleryman's instinct to seek a defensive position, to find the high ground. Tallulah found him. Kiona, his face scrubbed clean and his eyes bright with the wonder of the market, had been swept up by the scouts from Owl Canyon, who were buying him fried bread and telling him stories. For this moment, Jonah and Tallulah were alone in the crowd. She watched him for a long moment. He was a statue, a soldier at parade rest, braced for an impact. "You are not at war," she said, her voice close. "Just for him. It feels the same," he admitted, his jaw tight. "No." She stepped in front of him, blocking his view of the chaotic crowd. "The sound is different. Your feet are on sand, not mud. Breathe." He did. The air smelled of wood smoke, sweet fried dough, and horses. "You walk like you are still carrying your cannon," she said. "Your feet are heavy. You are waiting for the ground to shake." How else do you walk?" "You walk to feel the ground," she said. "Not to fight it." She held out her hand, palm up. "The scouts, my brother, they are busy. Walk with me. I will show you." He looked at her hand. It was a simple, open, and terrifying gesture. He put his own, scarred and shaking, into hers. She did not just take it. She wove her fingers through his, a connection that was firm, not. He looked at her hand. It was a simple, open, and terrifying gesture. He put his own, scarred and shaking, into hers. She did not just take it. She wove her fingers through his, a connection that was firm, not clinging. She led him away from the main thoroughfare, to a quieter, open space near the edge of the market, where a large bonfire burned, casting shadows. "My people have a walk. We call it the Vong Lua, the fire circle. It is not a dance. It is A way to be. She motioned to the ground. You walk in a circle, slowly. You feel the ground with your whole foot, the heel, the arch, the toe. You feel the earth holding you up. You are not pushing it down. You are not waiting for it to betray you. You are just here. She began to move, a slow, walking circle around the fire's outer ring of light. Her movements were fluid, her feet seeming to kiss the warm sand rather than strike it. She looked at him. Your turn. He felt foolish. He was a soldier. He marched. He ran. He did not feel the ground, but he took a step. His boot felt like lead, his knee stiff. He was clumsy, his balance off. You are thinking, she said. Stop thinking. Just feel this. She tapped her heel. Is the past this? She rolled her foot forward. Is the now this? She lifted her toes. Is the next step, but you are always here. He tried again. He walked, heel, arch, toe. He focused on the sensation of the packed earth, still warm from the day's sun. He focused on her, on the other side of the fire, her movements a dark, graceful rhythm. He walked, and she walked. He began to shake. It was the tremor. It was always the tremor. He stopped, furious, his fists clenching. She stopped with him. You are afraid, she said. No, he said, the word raw. Not of this. It's just new, my hands. I see them, she said. She stepped closer, into his space. She was not afraid of his shaking. She looked at his clenched fists. They are strong. They held a gun. They signed a book. They saved my brother. They are just hands. She was standing very close. The music from the fiddle was a sad, sweet thread in the air. The light from the lanterns made her skin look like polished copper. He wanted to touch her. He was terrified of touching her. The memory of the storm, in the arch, was a dream of survival. This was different. This was life. His hand, his shaking, traitorous hand, lifted. He did not grab. He moved with the slowness she had taught him. He was asking. His eyes were asking, may I? She did not move. She did not back away. She watched his hand, and a small, slow smile touched her lips. It was not a yes. It was an allowing. He put his hand on her back. It was not the desperate clutch of the storm. He did not pull her. He just rested his hand. He could feel the rough weave of her shawl, and beneath it, the impossible, solid, living warmth of her. His hand was on her back, and the world did not end. The cannons did not fire. He was just a man, standing with a woman. His hand on her back, the shaking did not stop, but it found a new rhythm, a rhythm that matched the fiddle, that matched his breathing. The market was too loud. The night was too public. Can we, he began, his voice hoarse. Can we walk away from this? She nodded. They left the fire circle, left the lights, left the noise. They walked, his hand still on her back, and she did not pull away. They walked past the last tent, past the edge of the town, following the sound of a small, hidden ribbon of water, Dry Willow Creek. They sat on the bank, a high, sandy cut. The town was a string of blurry, festive lights below them. The sky, up here, was a spill of diamonds. It is hard, he said, finally. The noise, the people. I do not fit. You are from one world, she said, looking at the town. I am from another. This is neither. It is a place in between. It is loud, and it is full of sharp edges. Tomorrow, he said, the word heavy. Harper, he told me to take Bracken to Fort Meridian. She turned. Her face was serious. The fort, your past, the place you ran from. Yes, he looked at his hands. I am afraid of it, more than I was of Bracken, more than the mine. It's a place of ghosts, of paper, of orders. I will go there, and I will be that ghost. The one you found, and I, she said, must take Kiona home. He is safe, but he is not home. I must go to Owl Canyon. The road had truly split. The fork was real. "We are not a story of salvation, Jonah," she said, her voice soft but hard, like the stone of the canyon. "I have not healed you. The storm did not wash you clean, and you have not saved me. You have only stood with me." She looked at him, her gaze so direct he almost flinched. "This is not a story. This is a choice. We are two people, changed by the world, who choose to stand together. Though tomorrow is hard, though tomorrow we are apart. I do not know how to be apart from this," he admitted. "And then come back. I do not know how to be the man who returns. You are the man who returns. You returned from the war. You returned from the fort. You returned from the fire," she said. They sat in silence. The creek whispered. The distant fiddle played. He looked at her. He saw the scar on her hand. He saw the strength in her shoulders. He saw the woman who had brought him back, not from the dead, but from the gray, empty space in between. He leaned toward her. He moved as slowly as he had in the fire circle. Heel, arch, toe. A deliberate movement. This was not the desperate, rain-soaked kiss of the storm. This was a choice. His eyes were open. They were on hers. He was asking. His hand, the one that was not shaking so badly now, came up. He did not touch her face. He brushed his knuckles, gently, against her arm. "May I?" She watched him. The small smile returned. She leaned in. A fractional movement. A nod. He closed the distance. His lips met hers. It was a real kiss. It was not a clash of survival. It was slow. It was warm. It was, in its own way, a question and an answer. He tasted the faint salt of the desert, the smoke from the fire. He felt her lips, soft and sure, move against his. It was a kiss of profound and quiet and mature understanding. It was a kiss that said, "I see you. I am here." He pulled back, just an inch. His forehead rested against hers, just as it had in the storm. But this time, it was not to hide. It was to share. They stayed like that for a long time. "I have one blanket," he said, his voice a whisper. "From the hotel." "I have my shawl," she said. They found a flat, sandy spot under a stand of pale-limbed sycamores, far enough from the town that the lights were just a memory. He spread his one, thin army blanket. It was a small, lonely square in the vastness. She sat on one side, he sat on the other. The space between them was a clear, respected boundary. This was not about that. This was about something harder. He laid down, on his back, his hands behind his head, staring at the stars. She sat for a moment longer, then lay down too, parallel to him, a foot of sand between them. He was tense. His whole body was a rigid line, his muscles screaming. He was near someone. He was trying to sleep. "Tonight," he said, the words a vow, spoken to the stars. "Tonight, I can sleep, here, beside you." He shut his eyes. He focused on the sound of the creek, on the smell of the air, on the solid, real presence of the woman breathing, just a foot away. He did not know when it happened. He did not fall into the blackness of a wartime sleep. He drifted. He let go, piece by piece. The tension in his shoulders eased. His breathing deepened. For the first time in 10 years, surrounded by nothing but the desert and the sound of another human heart, Jonah Mercer fell asleep. He woke to the first, pale silver light of dawn. He woke with a start. A cold panic, "Where am I? Who is here?" He turned his head. She was awake, sitting, watching him. She had been watching him sleep. You were here," he said, the words thick. "I was here," she said. "You did not dream. You did not go away." He sat up. He felt clear. He felt light. The air was cold, but he was warm. He realized, in the night, she must have covered him with her shawl. He looked down. He was wrapped in it. "Tallulah," he started. "You were cold," she said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. She reached out, and with a tenderness that shattered him, she brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead. You stayed. Jonah. She had done it. Sometime in the deep, peaceful night, she had called his name, and for the first of him. You were cold, she said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. She reached out, and with a tenderness that shattered him, she brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead. You stayed. Jonah. She had done it. Sometime in the deep, peaceful night, she had called his name, and for the first time, he had been there to hear it. The light of dawn was sharp, and it brought the day. It brought the choice. As they walked back, the town was already stirring. They saw Harper, the railroad man, standing outside the ice house, but he was not alone. He was with a man in a plain, dark suit who wore a star. A U.S. Marshal. Mercer, Harper called out, his voice crisp. A change of plans. You are not needed for escort. Jonah's heart leaped. The federal marshal will take the prisoner. Harper continued. He has a warrant for all of them. Your testimony, however, is now critical. He looked at Tallulah, then back at Jonah, his eyes sharp. The investigation needs a federal witness, a soldier. We can't. The treaty negotiations are delicate. A civilian liaison. Someone who was there. Someone, he added, who was on no one's payroll. It was an offer, a job, a new post. Jonah looked at Tallulah. She was already moving. Her scouts were waiting. Kiona was there, his face bright, holding the reins of 2 horses. I'm going, she said. It was not a question. I am staying, he said. They need a witness to make the ledger real. They stood, 10 feet apart, in the middle of the muddy street. The entire town, the new marshal, the railroad men, they all seemed to fade. The investigation will be long, she said. Fort Meridian, perhaps Washington. I know, he said. I have to go to Meridian, not as a ghost, but as a man. To give this. He tapped his heart, where his journal was, under his shirt. She held his gaze. Kiona must be with his people. I must be with them. Owl Canyon is my place. I know, he said. This was it, the choice. It was not a storybook ending. It was a hard, cold dawn. 1 moon, he said, his voice rough. After I give testimony, after I face them, I will be at Raven's Arch. It was not a promise. It was an appointment. Tallulah held his gaze for a long, long moment. She gave a single, sharp nod. After 1 moon, she said. She did not say she would be there. She did not say she would wait. She just acknowledged the appointment. She turned, swung up onto her horse, pulled Kiona up behind her. She did not look back. She and her scouts became small figures, riding north into the rising sun. Jonah watched until they were gone. He felt empty and full. He turned. The marshal was holding the reins of a horse. Mr. Mercer, the marshal said. We ride south to Fort Meridian. Jonah nodded. He took the reins. He mounted. He was a man with a choice, made, and a new one waiting. He was riding into his past, to finally, truly, leave it. Fort Meridian was everything Jonah had feared, and more. It was a city of noise, a fortress of suffocating order. He rode in beside the federal marshal, the man whose face was a blank slate of duty, and the world pressed in. He heard the clang of the smithy, the shouts from the parade ground, the hollow clatter of 100 boots on the boardwalk. He smelled coal smoke, horse manure, and the sharp, acidic scent of bureaucracy. He was not, however, a prisoner. He was not a ghost. He was a witness. He did not take Bracken to the stockade. The marshal handled that. Jonah was led to the Central Command building, a place he had only ever seen from a distance. The adjutant's office was hot, filled with the smell of stale cigars and ink. His old commander, Major Davies, was there. He was a man with a heavy mustache and eyes that had gone cold when he saw the name Harper on the marshal's paperwork. Jonah did not salute. He was, for all intents and purposes, a civilian. Mercer, the major said, his voice a low growl. You have been busy. This is an outrageous claim. This ledger is his major, Jonah said. His voice did not shake. The room was hot, but he was cold and clear. And his signature is in it, alongside yours. The major's face went purple, but the marshal was there, a silent, federal presence. Jonah placed his own journal on the desk. It was a small, scarred, unassuming thing next to the official blotters. "And this is mine," he said. "My testimony, it's all in there. The day I met her, the guns in the warehouse, the bridge, the fort, it's all there." He faced the ghost. He faced the man who had signed his exile. And he felt nothing, no fear, no anger, just a vast, empty quiet. He had told his truth. The rest was just noise. He was in Fort Meridian for 4 days. He gave his testimony, a sworn statement, to a man who wrote it all down. He named the dates. He named the men. He signed his name, his full name, Jonah Silas Mercer. At the bottom, on the 5th day, he was given his discharge, honorable, a payment of $28 for his time, and he was told Kestrel Bluff was no longer a military concern. The Army, embarrassed and exposed by the ledger, was washing its hands of the entire Northern Territory Railroad expansion. The news was already on the wire. A full federal committee was being formed. The project was frozen. The senator had resigned for health reasons. Jonah took the money. He did not buy a drink. He did not buy a new uniform. He bought a good horse, 2 new blankets, and a bag of coffee. He rode north. He did not ride south, back to his old life. He rode north, back to Seraphine Wells. He had half a moon. He spent it in the town, a man with no orders. He was a strange figure, the hero of the bridge, the man who had faced down Bracken. He was offered free drinks, which he turned down. He was offered a job as town deputy, which he refused. He just waited. He fixed a wagon wheel for the smith. He helped the hotel owner reshingle a roof. He was just a man, present, his hands steady, his nights, for the first time, filled with a deep, dreamless, and profound sleep. On the 29th day, he rode out. He rode to Kestrel Bluff. It was already a ruin. The gate, which he had so carefully barred, had been torn off its hinges, likely by the men from the fort sent to clear it out. The wind, his old companion, was howling through the gaps in the palisade, but the sound was just wind. He walked into his old quarters. His cot was gone. His few things scattered, taken by scavengers. But they had missed one thing. On the floor, in the corner, was his old journal, the one from before, the one he had snapped shut. He picked it up. He opened it to the last entry. "I haven't slept beside anyone since the war." He took the pencil stub from his pocket. He turned to the next, clean page. He pressed down, the graphite moving surely, his hand as steady as the rock of the canyon. August 29th, 1876. Changed. He wrote, not broken. He closed the book. He did not take it with him. He left it on the empty ammunition crate. A final, closed report. He walked out of the fort, and he did not look back. That night, the moon was a perfect white disk. It silvered the land, making the desert as bright as a pale, ghostly day. He arrived at Raven's Arch. The air was still. The scent of rain was gone. It was just a place of stone, silent and vast. He dismounted. He waited. He sat under the arch, in the place where they had sheltered from the storm. He felt a cold knot of fear. A choice. It was a choice. What if she had not chosen? What if her path, her family, her home, was a pull stronger than the quiet words of a broken soldier? A month was a long time. A life was longer. He was a man who had waited for battles, waited for orders, waited for ghosts. This was the hardest wait. He was waiting for his life. He heard the sound, a single, dislodged pebble, skittering down the path. He stood up, his heart a hammer. He looked out. He saw them, 3 figures, dark against the moonlight. Not a war party, not a threat. A small figure broke from the front and ran. A joyful, scrambling run. It was Kiona. He was not a captive. He was not a victim. He was just a boy. He ran up to Jonah, a huge grin on his face. He was holding something, a small, carved bird. "I made this," Kiona said, his English clear. "For you." Jonah knelt, his bad knee cracking. He took the bird. It was rough, but it was perfect. "It is good," Jonah said, his voice thick. Tallulah was there. She had not dismounted. She sat on her horse, watching him. She was not a savior. She was just a woman. The moonlight caught the silver in her hair, the strength in her shoulders. He stood. He walked to her. He did not reach for her. He just stood by her stirrup. "You came," he said. "It was the moon," she said, her voice soft. "It is hard to ignore." She slid from the horse, a fluid, single motion. She stood in front of him. The space between them was electric. "The Major," she said. "The fort, your ghosts." "They are just men," he said, "in rooms, writing on paper. I gave my report. I am done. I am a civilian." She looked at him, a long, searching look. Then, just as she had in the storm, she put her hand on his chest, flat, a connection. She felt his heart, the steady, solid beat. "This heart," she whispered, her own words, reflected back. "It has learned a new shape." He covered her hand with his own, pressing it to his chest. He felt the calluses, the scar. "I haven't slept beside anyone since the war," he said. The words were the same. The meaning was new. "Until that night in the storm. And I have slept. Every night. I am not avoiding, not anymore." He looked into her eyes. "If you will have me, Tallulah, I will learn how to stay." She did not smile. She did not weep. She was a woman of the rock, and her answer was as solid. She leaned in and put her forehead against his. It was not a kiss. It was an agreement, a treaty. "We will have to teach you," she said, her breath warm. "Staying is harder than running." They did not go to Owl Canyon. They did not go to Seraphine Wells. They talked, their voices low under the arch, as Kiona slept by the fire they built. They talked about the small, stone signal house at Verde Arroyo, the place with the train tracks, the place that was not a fort and not a reservation, but a place between. "It is abandoned," he said. "The railroad is gone. It has a roof," she said, "and water. It is a good place, for a trade, for letters, for two worlds to speak." The final image was not an ending. It was a beginning. A small flag, tied to a pole, stuck in the rocks above the signal house. It was not red, white, and blue. It was not the flag of her people. It was a patch of his old, dark blue uniform, and a strip of her brown, desert-colored shawl, sewn together. A new sign. The wind blew, but it was just the wind, carrying the sound of a distant creek. And for the first time, from the small, repaired house, there was the low, quiet sound of laughter. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and show your support by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this tale.